It was 5:30 in the morning. The night shift was finally coming to an end, and Nuria sniffed, sitting on the couch in the doctor's lounge. She couldn't barely see anything, as if her eyes were filled with sand, but she tried to make out the text message that Leoncio sent her the previous evening: "We need to talk urgently." Now she would have to explain to her fiancé that she had spent the evening and practically the whole night in the operating room. And although the work of an intern in the intensive care unit was not easy, she enjoyed it. Nuria pressed the call button under the My Love icon and was listening to the indifferent beeps for a long time. Obviously, Leoncio was fast asleep. Taking a deep breath and holding it for a few seconds, the girl let out a loud exhale and stretched. She liked this wonderful feeling of duty fulfilled when pleasant emotional and physical fatigue set in after a successful surgery. Well, she still had a couple of hours to sleep before going home. And again, she had a strange dream, a dim hall with high vaulted ceilings and tapestries hanging on the walls depicting unfamiliar people, antique furnishings, chandeliers with thousands of lit candles, a grand piano, and a woman in a long antique dress standing in the center of the hall. Her face, noble and stern, seemed carved out of stone, but it was beautiful. High cheekbones, enormous eyes whose color was impossible to discern. The woman extended her hand to Nuria, on which lay a huge golden ring with a bright green stone. Nuria reached out to touch it. But then a phone call snapped the girl out of sleeping. Leoncio was calling. Nuria hastily pressed answer and in a groggy voice said, "Hello." Without greeting, he informed her that he would be waiting for her in 40 minutes at the cafe near his workplace. Disregarding her own sense of offense, the girl quickly dropped the call, put on her favorite jeans, a t-shirt, and, gathering her remaining strength, set off to meet her beloved one. She stuffed her jacket into her backpack since spring was in full swing outside. Leoncio sat at a table by the window, stirring his cooled espresso absent-mindedly as he was staring ahead in thought. "Hey," Nuria leaned toward him and left a light kiss on his compressed lips. "What happened?" "We need to talk," the guy said briefly, avoiding eye contact. The girl sat down across from him and reached for the menu, but he stopped her. "I've already ordered you a cappuccino, we won't be here long." Golden watches flashed on his wrist, a gift from his parents for his 30th birthday. "But I would like to eat." "Since yesterday, all I've had is a couple of apples," Nuria objected, looking questioningly into her beloved's face as she couldn't know warmth or tenderness in his expression. They finally looked at each other. Leoncio interrupted the silence. "We should break up," he bluntly stated. "I love another girl and I want to be with her." Those words sounded out of the blue. Nuria tried to comprehend it but couldn't. Her brain seemed to dull in an instant, and her tongue refused to obey. People were walking outside on the street, the May sun was shining, but time stood still here in this small, quiet cafe at the beginning of a day promising to be very warm indeed. And Nuria kept staring at Leoncio's blank face, searching for signs of the person who had embraced her goodbye just 24 hours ago and passionately kissed her in front of everyone. I don't understand," her voice betrayed a tremor of betrayal. "Who is this other girl?" "You know her," Leoncio calmly replied, taking a sip of coffee. "Let's just skip making scenes, okay?" "What?" Nuria repeated dully. "Are you serious?" Hurt and bitterness engulfed her so forcefully that it choked her. Meanwhile, the waitress brought a cup of steaming aromatic cappuccino, which turned out to be quite timely because in those 10 seconds, the girl managed to regain her composure. "So, who is this girl? And when did she couldn't find the right words, these feelings start between you?" "It's been 3 months already, I just couldn't tell you. First, there was the accident, then your illness, and then your father's death. Something always got in the way." Nuria closed her eyes. She had never experienced such humiliation. When she opened them again, she saw Leah Blanco approaching them. And she understood everything. This girl was the daughter of Leoncio's father's business partner, the sole heir to a profitable construction company. She was a true princess, a social butterfly, exactly the kind that Agata, Leoncio's mother, would want her son to marry. Struggling to hold back her tears, Nuria lifted her head and met Lee's gaze. It was triumphant and insolent, causing a shiver to run through her. However, Nuria stared back at her intently and forced a smile. No one would see her tears, certainly not this Barbie with her fake nails, hair, and eyelashes. Leah is moving in with me. Leoncio evidently decided to be consistent and gradually finish off his now ex-fiancé. I need to gather my things. Nuria tried to keep her voice firm, but it trembled with betrayal. Your things are in my car. I'll take them wherever you tell me to. Nuria stared into space for a moment, then slowly turned her head and locked eyes with him. Just take them out of the car and get out from my life, she blurted out with a tired voice. An hour later, she was crying in her mother's embrace in the small kitchen, where a kettle was boiling on the stove, filling the air with the scent of childhood. It was good that it was Saturday, and her mother had the day off. Nuria wasn't overly sentimental, but at this moment, this home, this place where she grew up, felt like the only refuge from the overwhelming emotions of betrayal by the person to whom she had given 3 years of her life. The past few months had been a constant shock for the girl. First, there was a terrible accident in which she narrowly escaped death and needed a blood transfusion. As a result, it was revealed that she was not her parents' biological daughter. She had been taken into their home as a baby many years ago, and no one knew where she came from or who brought her into this world. They had to find donors with a matching blood type. Second, her father suffered a stroke from the stress and passed away in the ambulance without regaining consciousness. Nuria held his hand at that moment. This morning was the final straw, and Nuria cried without holding back, inhaling the familiar scent of catnip and the comforting aroma of her mother's homemade robe. There, my dear, stop it. It can't go on like this. Everything will work out. Valeria stroked her daughter's hair, struggling to hold back her own tears. He's not worth it, the woman pondered. He's a spoiled young man of rich parents, a golden boy, a rich kid. He's not a match for my smart, self-sufficient, and beautiful daughter. They've been in the kitchen until evening, drinking many cups of strong coffee and eventually polishing it all off with homemade cherry liqueur. Nuria went to sleep in her old room, where everything remained the same as it was on the day she left her childhood home and moved in with Leoncio. That was 2 years ago. She curled up on the creaky bed, exhausted from the day's turmoil, the night shift at the hospital, and the alcohol she had consumed, and sank into a deep sleep. Once again, she saw the woman in the antique dress, calling her into her secret world. This time, she led Nuria down a spiral staircase that seemed to descend into the depths of the earth. Nuria tried to call out to her, but she continued to descend. The rustling of the dress's crinoline against the stone steps echoed through the eerie silence of this strange corridor. Finally, they stood before a door adorned with intertwined plant stems, forming a sinister bouquet. There were wormwood, nettle, and chamomile. Nuria didn't know the names of the others. Counting 9 different stems, the girl took a deep breath and woke up. It was still dark, and a cool breeze rustled the curtains near the open window. Nuria was drenched in sweat and breathing heavily, as if she had been running through hilly terrain. There was a burning sensation in her chest, double vision in her eyes, and a tingling sensation in her fingertips, as if they were charged with electricity. She felt thirsty and walked barefoot to the kitchen, pouring a glass of boiled water and drinking it in one gulp. Her head felt like it was splitting, and Nuria glared hatefully at the empty liqueur bottle sitting by the sink. The clock in the hallway showed 4 a.m. Suddenly, the dream came to mind. It was so vivid and realistic that Nuria felt like it had actually happened. What was that pattern on the door? Who was that woman who kept invading her consciousness? The girl took her laptop out of the suitcase and sat on the bed, placing it on her lap. So, what was she searching for? Plants, symbols, signs? The woman with the ring? It all seemed like nonsense. As a result, she typed wormwood, chamomile, nettle into the search engine. Google immediately continued the chain: plantain, fennel, yarrow, apple tree, common bruisewort, chervil, 9 sacred herbs. And then the links: Odin's spell, witch's bouquet, witch's herb, black and white magic. Nuria was bewildered. What was this witch's bouquet? Considering it all a foolish endeavor, she closed the laptop and flopped back onto the pillow. Leoncio's words, "I love someone else," came back to her, and tears welled up in the corners of her eyes. After tomorrow it was her birthday, and this time she wouldn't have Leoncio or her father by her side, not to mention she would have the night shift at the hospital. Suddenly, she thought about not knowing the story of her birth, her roots, her heritage, or even the ones who gave her this hair the color of ripe rye and her huge green eyes. The Sunday stretched endlessly. Time seemed to stand still in her childhood home. Her mother was cooking something in the kitchen while the television murmured in the background. Next door, a neighbor's child was practicing the violin, and outside, children were playing, rejoicing in the May sun. She missed her father so much, his kind gaze, wise advice, and his familiar shoulder. Nuria and her father had always had a special bond, and his passing was a devastating blow. By evening, the strange tingling in her fingertips intensified, and Nuria grew concerned. They seemed charged with electricity, and touching them together caused pain. To top it off, her vision and sense of smell inexplicably worsened. "It seems like caught a virus," Nuria thought as she was going to bed, covering herself with the blanket as she was shivering. She spent the night in a strange oblivion, sometimes waking up and falling back asleep. There were faces, strange objects, and, in the end, Nuria, exhausted, opened her eyes. The morning greeted her with pouring rain. The open window allowed the mad scents of rain, lilacs, and wet road. The air was generously infused with ozone and made her head spin. In the bathroom, the girl looked into the mirror, a completely exhausted, gaunt figure with dark circles under her eyes and a pale face stared back at her. "It's all because of stress," she concluded, unscrewing the toothpaste tube. Somewhere beyond the wall, a hairdryer buzzed, the clock ticked in the hallway, the refrigerator hummed in the kitchen, and water dripped from the tap, drip, drip, drip. Nuria responded aloud, noticing sounds she had never paid attention to before. After washing her face and brushing her teeth, she headed to make coffee, but her mother beat her to it. 2 cups of coffee and cheesy scrambled eggs were on the kitchen table. They had a peaceful breakfast, avoiding discussions about the future and, especially, the past. However, the past decided to make itself known through a message from Leoncio. "There are some of your books. I'll bring them to work." "What books?" "A surgery manual?" "Keep them." Nuria wanted to write, but the prospect of seeing his face again suddenly seemed so tempting that she simply replied, "Okay." She was getting ready in a hurry and saying goodbye to her mother at the entrance. The girl headed to the bus stop. It was rushing hour and raining, and she didn't have time to spare. She risked being late for work. Ironically, no minibus wanted to stop. They were all packed with passengers, overflowing beyond capacity. Nuria felt a surge of incredible energy, something unfamiliar bubbling in her chest, threatening to burst out. A bus emerged from around the corner. She could see that the interior was full of people, but it suddenly stopped, the doors opened, and a young man standing at the entrance nearly fell. However, upon seeing Nuria, he quickly jumped off the vehicle's step and said, "Miss, you're completely soaked. Please, go ahead. I'll wait for the next one." Nuria was taken aback and was about to refuse, but something held her back. Something strange. Muttering words of gratitude, she climbed onto the now empty step. The doors closed, and the last thing she saw was the bewildered face of the boy left standing in the rain at the bus stop. Nuria didn't arrive late for work. She arrived just in time, with 5 minutes to spare. Upon returning to her department, she found a package of books on her desk. Your beloved one stopped by. He brought the books, Natalia, the ward attendant, informed her while mopping the floor. He was as angry as the devil, didn't even ask about you. Just tossed the package on the table and left. "So, I won't see him again." Nuria struggled to suppress the urge to burst into tears. The day flew by in a frantic pace, and Nuria rushed back and forth. There were more patients than usual. Towards the end of the day, They brought in a girl who had been in a car accident and urgently sent her to the operating table. An artery had been damaged, and blood was pouring from her neck like a river. As they lifted her on the elevator to the surgical ward, Nuria frantically applied pressure to the wound, fervently hoping that the girl would be saved, that help would be provided in time. To her surprise, when they reached the operating room, the bleeding had stopped, and the wound seemed to have healed itself. New tissue had closed the edges, and there was no longer any threat to her life. In utter bewilderment, Nuria mechanically assisted the surgeons, trying not to look at the spot where her hands had just been. Returning to the staff room, she once again noticed the package of books that Leoncio had brought. Indeed, there was a medical reference book, a dream book, a couple of textbooks, and a strange, unfamiliar book in a thick, ancient binding. The book had no title or year of publication. It was written in a strange language, Latin, which Nuria had no knowledge of, and it looked like a collection of recipes. Completely confused, the girl dialed Leoncio's number. "What book did you bring me?" "The one in the ancient binding?" "It's not mine. You know, I always suspected you were into peculiar things, but not to this extent." Leoncio's voice trembled for some reason. "I don't need this occult stuff in my house. Listen, don't call me again." Nuria hung up the phone and stared thoughtfully at the book, which suddenly seemed alive to her. The pages seemed to vibrate, and she couldn't shake off the feeling that something very strange was happening. Unexpectedly, she remembered the links about the witch's wreath and the 9 herbs. She opened the folio again to the first page and only now noticed a small symbol in the top right corner. The hair on the back of her neck stood on end when she recognized the same symbol drawn on the door in her dream. It was the intricate intertwining of the 9 sacred plants. Her heart seemed to skip a beat after beat, and the silence in the room became eerie. She distinctly heard unfamiliar, unusual sounds. Nuria could swear she heard the rustle of a dress on the cold parquet floor of the staff room. Upon arriving home, she immediately headed to the shower. Standing under the hot streams, she calmed down a bit and tried to find a logical explanation for everything that had happened to her that day. But no matter how hard she tried, nothing made sense. In her room, Nuria turned on her laptop again and opened the browser. She typed 9 sacred herbs in the search bar. Google presented her with familiar links and many others. However, her gaze caught an inconspicuous entry at the very end of the search results, 9 herbs for the spell of the White Witch, accompanied by the small symbol she was already familiar with, depicting a wreath of various plants. She clicked on the link and started reading. The union of sacred herbs, wormwood, chamomile, nettle, plantain, fennel, yarrow, apple, comfrey, and chervil are means of achieving goals for those possessing the power of the White Witch. Together or individually, they are an essential component of any spell or ritual illuminated by the moon and serve for the good of the white and all of humanity. They must not be used against a person or for ill purposes, as this prohibition is linked to black magic, the power of which destroys those who dare to disobey it. The witch draws strength from the Mother Earth, for all wisdom and understanding of the world are embedded within her. There was so much more. Nuria felt her head spinning, her eyelids drooping, and the room spinning around her. Unable to process the information she had just received, she fell into a deep sleep. In her dream, the woman with the pale face appeared again, this time holding a wreath in her hands. Nuria was no longer scared, it just was very, very cold. She suddenly realized that darkness had surrounded them. It became almost tangible, and she couldn't see anything except for strange glowing eyes and a triumphant, victorious smile. The woman approached and placed the wreath on Nuria's head. Then everything disappeared suddenly. Nuria tossed and turned in her sleep, thrown into both heat and cold. She would fall downwards, then suddenly soar upwards in blinding sparks. Her heart felt like it was about to burst from her chest, beating heavily and pounding against her ribs. It seemed to her that she was dying. Somewhere on the edge of consciousness, at its very precipice, the old Nuria remained. On the morning of her 20th birthday, she woke up as a different person. Opening her eyes, Nuria felt an unprecedented surge of strength and energy. She had never felt this good before. Surprisingly, all the sadness, hurt, and bitterness that consumed her just yesterday dissolved along with the moonlight of this extraordinary night. Her mother greeted her with a joyful smile and a cake she baked for her daughter's birthday every year. On the table, there was a small box tied with a red ribbon. "This is for you, my dear," her mother handed the box to Nuria. "May it bring you happiness." The girl warmly thanked the one who raised her, opened the gift, and almost dropped it. There was a silver pendant resting on a tiny velvet cushion in the shape of intertwined plants, resembling a wreath. There were exactly 9 stems. Nuria counted them several times. "Where did you get this?" she asked her mother, her voice trembling. Her mother immediately became upset, misinterpreting her reaction. I ordered it from a jewelry workshop." "But where did you get this symbol?" "For heaven's sake." Nuria was on the verge of fainting from surprise and bewilderment. Too many coincidences, too many mysteries, too many questions. It all seemed a bit eerie to her. "You won't believe it," her mother tried to explain, "but I had a dream this wreath. I saw this pendant on you and decided to actually order it. Does it upset you?" She embraced her daughter sympathetically and asked, taken aback. "It's okay, Mom," the girl regained her composure. "I just didn't expect such an unusual gift from you." She tried to force a smile. "Happy birthday! Happy birthday! Hooray!" Joyful shouts almost knocked Nuria off her feet when she opened the doors of the staff room. After warm hugs and congratulations, her colleagues and Nuria sat down to have coffee and the birthday cake they brought for her. Unexpectedly, Nuria's gaze fell upon a newspaper lying on top of folders with medical histories. Without knowing why, she picked it up and started flipping through it. When she reached the classified section, Nuria's eyes caught on the intricately displayed phone number under a small piece of text. "A qualified nurse is urgently needed for care of a disabled person in a country estate, live-in position, weekly payment." Something strange was happening in Nuria's mind because, upon entering the hallway, she dialed the number. After some time, a woman's voice answered. "Santos Mansion, I'm listening." "Hello, I'm calling about the advertisement." Nuria suddenly felt nervous, but she composed herself. "Are you still looking for a nurse?" "Oh, thank goodness." "Yes, absolutely. We really need one." The voice on the other end of the line belonged, apparently, to an elderly woman. It was low but pleasant. "Then I could come for an interview, for example, tomorrow. If it's convenient for you?" "That would be wonderful. I'll send you the address by text message." "To this number?" "Yes, please." Nuria ended the call and stared at the wall. The phone beeped. A message with the address had arrived. A swarm of thoughts whirled in her head, and her emotions overwhelmed her. Suddenly, she felt like she had touched something that would change her life forever. Her hand instinctively reached for the pendant she had been given, and Nuria could swear she felt strange, unexplainable vibrations from the cold surface of the silver. If someone had asked her the next morning how her shift went, she wouldn't have been able to say a word because the day flew by in a haze. She mechanically performed her work, fortunate that the night had been calm, and eagerly awaited the morning. Rushing home and changing clothes, Nuria dashed out of the house so quickly that she almost knocked her neighbor off her feet along with her dog. Mumbling words of apology, she hurried to the bus stop. Within a few minutes, she arrived at the train station, bought a ticket at the suburban ticket office, and half an hour later, she was already seated on the train. Her heart thumped wildly in her chest, and her throat felt dry. She had never been so nervous in her life. Outside the train window, high-rise buildings and parks flashed by, followed by factories with heavily breathing chimneys, then country houses and agricultural fields, with scattered farm vehicles here and there. Finally, the landscape changed dramatically. It was the dense forest everywhere. According to the navigator, there was only a little bit more to go, and Nuria wondered what could be in this forest wilderness. However, gradually the forest parted, and the train stopped at a small station where two elderly women sat on folding chairs, selling sunflower seeds. The girl stepped out of the stuffy train car towards the sun. She had to walk 1.5 miles from the station, and she was glad she was wearing comfortable sneakers. After greeting the old ladies, she asked them which way to go, and upon receiving the answer, she briskly walked along the path in the indicated direction. The forest was beautiful. Illuminated by the birch trunks, it breathed, exuded a pleasant aroma, and seemed to be rejoicing in something. Birds were singing everywhere, May beetles buzzed, and insects chirped. Nature was teeming with renewed life, and Nuria felt like she was part of it. It felt so unusual for her to be in these untouched places, away from civilization. Finally, after walking for about a mile, the girl stumbled upon a carved wrought iron signpost with the inscription Santa's Mansion. She quickened her pace and 15 minutes later emerged from the forest into a vast meadow. What lay before her eyes didn't fit in her head. She expected to see a relatively modern 2-story house, slightly neglected due to the owner's limited health capabilities. But there, hidden from prying eyes by an alley of poplars, stood a huge ancient mansion, 3 stories high. The bulky, gnarled building was covered in ivy, which had just started to sprout leaves. And the columns by the wide stone porch reminded her of the Acropolis, although they weren't as ancient as the Greek architectural monument. There were several other buildings on the premises, including a large garage, an outbuilding, a stable, and an obvious carriage house. I feel like I've traveled through time, Nuria thought. Indeed, everything around her had such an atmospheric ambience, from the house to the trees, that historical films could be shot there without the need for elaborate set designs. The gravel cheerfully crunched beneath her shoes as Nuria walked along the path towards the grand entrance. She didn't even have a chance to ring the doorbell when the door swung wide open, revealing a petite woman in her mid-60s with a pleasant face and completely gray hair neatly arranged in a tight bun at the back of her head. She was wearing plaid trousers and a light blouse tucked into them. Her appearance was so simple and elegant that Nuria regretted wearing her favorite ripped jeans and a plain cotton t-shirt. "Welcome, dear. We've been waiting for you." The woman gestured to invite the guest inside. Nuria greeted her and stepped into the pleasant semi-darkness of the hallway. "Let's go to the library, it will be the most comfortable place to talk. Besides, there's a beautiful view of the garden from there. By the way, my name is Honorina. Nice to meet you." Nuria struggled to keep up with her as she led her through the spacious living room. "I'm Nuria." "Oh, Nuria. What a beautiful old-fashioned name," Honorina commented as her own heels clicked on the floor. The house was cooler than outside and equally atmospheric. Time seemed to stand still here, hidden in the antique tapestries and 19th century interior items. Dust settled on the shelves with books and photographs, forming a forgotten ball of yarn under the sprawling armchair by the fireplace. The library was brightly lit thanks to the enormous bay window, which indeed offered a breathtaking view of the blooming garden. "Have a seat, dear, I'll arrange coffee in a moment." Nuria smiled and settled into the chair pointed out by the woman, thinking that Honorina might soon pick up the bell from the table and ring it, summoning the maid. Instead, she took out her mobile phone from her trouser pocket and dialed a number. "Katerina, please prepare coffee for us and bring it to the library. Oh, and don't forget something delicious for our guest." After saying it, she hung up the phone and settled into the chair across from her. For a minute, she silently and with a smile observed her interlocutor. Nuria became alert. "Yes, here, I have a diploma from the Institute and certificates of completed advanced courses." "Oh, no," interrupted Honorina. "I see that you suit us." "What?" The girl was confused. "You won't ask me about my skills, work experience?" "You see, dearie," the woman encouragingly patted her hand. "I have lived a long life and I understand people. The thing is, we need not so much a nurse as a companion. Your future charge is not an easy person with a complex history. Your responsibilities will include therapeutic exercises, monitoring medication intake, and assistance in small household matters. You might ask why I don't do all of this. Well, because a young person of 28 would simply get bored with such a boring shell like me. She laughed. So, my ward is a young man? Nuria sincerely exclaimed. I thought he was your spouse. Unfortunately, Honorana sighed sadly. But it would have been better if you were right. The reality is that my husband left us 40 years ago, and my only grandson is in a wheelchair. So, he's your grandson? Yes, Jamie is my only relative. We have no one else. She took a handkerchief out of her pocket and wiped her moistened eyes. He has been confined here with me for 2 years now. His parents died on the day he became disabled in a car accident. I'm sorry for your loss, Nuria said sincerely. It must be terrible to lose your child and see your only grandson suffer. That's how it turned out. In our family, long-lived individuals are only women. My son was only 53. At that moment, the door opened and a plump woman in her 50s entered the library with a large tray. Meet Nuria, this is Katerina, our cook and maid, Honorana introduced her. Katerina placed her burden on a small table and smiled widely at the guest. Hello. Good day. Nuria smiled back. Katerina, this is Nuria, she will be looking after Jamie. Katerina brazenly looked the girl up and down and without hesitation said, Thank God, I hope our young master will thaw a bit with you around. The homeowner gave her a reproachful look, and Katerina, realizing her mistake, quickly left. Honorana sat in her chair and quickly poured coffee. This is Arabica, she announced, seeing the guest trying to figure out what Katerina had put in the teapot while inhaling the aroma. It smells amazing, Nuria sincerely said. Since she had left home quite a while ago and had not had breakfast, the girl ate a freshly baked croissant with raspberry cottage cheese, filling with great appetite. Her conversation partner only slowly sipped her coffee and served the guest homemade cookies with nuts and fragrant blackcurrant jam. Suddenly, the door to the library swung open again and a young man dressed in a cotton shirt and jeans appeared in a modern wheelchair. Nuria's heart skipped a beat. An electric charge seemed to run through her body as she saw his handsome masculine face with sharply chiseled features and deep, gray, ice-cold eyes. Dark curly hair growing to the collar of his shirt and tucked behind his ears, broad, once muscular shoulders. He was slim and perfectly built, holding a book in his hands. Honorana jumped up from her chair. And here's my grandson, she announced. Jamie, this is Nuria. Grandma, I asked you not to, he muttered, barely glancing at Nuria. His eyebrows furrowed, and his lips turned into a thin line. I don't need a caretaker. Well, of course not. The old woman defended herself. You need an assistant. I don't need an assistant. Jamie, stop, that's rude. I don't care, I'm not here for that, Nuria blurted out. It was so unexpected that both the grandmother and the grandson turned their heads toward her. I'm here to get you back on your feet. She understood that it sounded at least foolish and provocative, but she suddenly realized that she believed in it. You see, dear, Honorana began. What are you talking about? Jamie sharply interrupted his grandmother and stared directly at Nuria. Their gazes finally met. I will never walk again. I don't agree with that, Nuria calmly and confidently said. She suddenly remembered that girl with a torn aorta, and it gave her strength. And she felt that familiar tingling in her fingertips again. For a few seconds, they looked at each other, as if studying, assessing something, tasting this strange first encounter. Finally, the young man looked away from her face and, abruptly turning around, left the library. Honorana let out a loud sigh. Looks like we managed. Well, congratulations, Nuria, I thought it would be much worse. She sank heavily into the chair, with no trace of the former smiling lady left. You shouldn't have said that in vain. Jamie hasn't yet experienced the pain of loss and hasn't come to terms with his condition. The doctor said he injured his spinal cord. I believe everything will work out, Nuria quietly said. And you should believe it too. Yes, that's true. But you see, my dear girl, after the accident, Jamie lost both his friends and his fiancé, who, unable to bear being confined here, one day simply packed her things and left. She returned the ring to him. He is still wounded in his heart, you understand? Everything will be all right, Nuria said firmly, and the two women suddenly smiled at each other. The next day, she sat in front of the startled head of the department and wrote her resignation letter. The lines flew from her pen at such speed, as if someone was urging her on. Since leaving the Santos mansion less than 24 hours ago, she couldn't get rid of the strange feeling that she couldn't even name or explain. Was it confusion? Fear? Joy? Excitement? Perhaps, all at once. The allotted 2 weeks of notice passed by in the blink of an eye. She mechanically carried out her work, filled out medical history cards, made rounds, and helped with patient intake. Nuria no longer felt anything strange about her state of mind, and, in the end, everything that had happened to her seemed no more than a painful dream, brought on by fatigue and stress. When she packed her suitcase and got into the car sent by Honorina, her mother hugged her in farewell. I hope you know what you're doing, my girl. Nuria just nodded. Faster, faster. She had an irresistible urge to return to this house in the middle of the forest. Just call me every day, please. Valeria's eyes welled up with tears. Otherwise, I'll go crazy. You're going so far away. Well, of course, Mom. Nuria pressed her lips to her mother's cheek and gladly inhaled her familiar scent and added, It's only miles away. Her mother sobbed again and released her daughter from her embrace. Honorina greeted her at the alley. It was the first day of summer, and she was flaunting an elegant silk dress with a bright floral print. Joyfully hugging Nuria, she announced that lunch would be in an hour. In the meantime, she could rest in her room and settle in. After lunch, I will show you the house, she announced. The driver unloaded Nuria's belongings and carried them into the room prepared for her by Katerina. Besides Honorina, Jamie, and Katerina, there were also a driver and a gardener living in the house. The gardener also took care of the stables. It turned out that Santos still had a couple of horses. The men lived in the annex, Katerina in a small room under the stairs, and Nuria was led to a beautiful bright room on the ground floor next to the library. It was located next to Jamie's room, and as she unpacked her things, the girl could hear the noise of his wheelchair's mechanism and the sounds of music. Obviously, her ward was a fan of Debussy. Spreading out her suitcase, a significant portion of which consisted of medical rehabilitation references for seriously ill patients and a guide to physical therapy, Nuria began to explore the room. It was decorated in silvery lavender tones. The decor was quite modest, but modern and elegant, inviting with its unpretentiousness. It would have been perfectly complemented by candlesticks on pedestals and a computer. However, there were no candlesticks or computers, only a large and comfortable bed made of bleached oak. There were 2 bedside tables matching the color, a small wardrobe, a console, a small mirror, and a couple of empty shelves for personal belongings. Delighted with the room, Nuria changed into her linen peach-colored trouser suit, which she bought in Turkey a couple of years ago, and slip-on shoes. She simply tied her hair into a ponytail. Before opening the door to the corridor, she took a deep breath and closed her eyes. Calm down, just calm down. A new chapter of your life is beginning. Finding her way to the dining room without difficulty, Nuria knocked and entered just in case. Honorina warmly rose to greet her. Come in, my dear. Sit next to me. But the icy gaze of her gray eyes seemed to nail her to the floor. She stood in the doorway, unsure of what to do. Jamie looked straight at her, and his gaze said, What the hell are you doing here? Finally, she was able to push herself together. Good day, Jamie. She looked away and, silently overcoming the distance from the door to the table, sat down on the chair next to Honorina. Hello, Nuria, after a moment's hesitation, Jamie responded. That's your name, right? He stared at her. Exactly, their eyes met again, but this time Nuria maintained her gaze. When would you like to start physical therapy sessions? He answered immediately. As soon as possible, Nuria. The way he said her name made Nuria flustered, but she quickly got it together. You still have massage and hydrotherapy to be done, as well as a whole range of medications. Where did you gather all this information? Jamie interrupted her. I studied your medical history. Well then, he concluded, you must know that my case is hopeless. But nonetheless, to please my grandmother, I will do what you say. Frankly, I just want to dispel the boredom. Nuria simply nodded. Enjoy your meal, Nuria, and the young man began to eat his soup with such an expression that nothing else interested him. Honorina also ate in silence, occasionally glancing at Nuria and then at her grandson, and seemed satisfied with everything. However, she couldn't eat even a piece of food. She barely touched the soup and now idly prodded the delicious roast with her fork. She knew it wouldn't be easy, considering the patient's character. And yet, she couldn't even think about leaving. A strange unknown force kept her here, and she intended to find out what exactly it was. After lunch, Nuria returned to her room and changed into her medical uniform. She spread out the treatment plan given to her by Honorina and decided to start with the massage. She had watched countless videos on YouTube and medical websites, and she had also received training in massage as an additional specialty during her second year of college. Nuria found her patient in the garden. He was sitting with a book in his hands, but he wasn't reading it. Instead, he was gazing into the distance, beyond the low fence, towards the grove where a blue stream meandered. What are you reading? She interrupted his solitude. 100 Years of Solitude, the young man replied. There was no arrogance, anger, or discontent on his face. He turned to look at her, and her heart skipped a beat in her chest. She lowered her gaze to his hands with their long fingers clutching the thick cover. How many pages have you read? I've only just begun. Well, I don't like Marquez, Nuria shrugged. I prefer Dumas or Tolstoy. The young man suddenly laughed. A young lady like you must not have been experienced bitter life yet, right? Still believing in princes? She approached him and sat at the edge of the bench where a plaid blanket lay. Not anymore, the girl smiled. But I believe in nobility, honor, generosity, courage, and fate. So, you're a romantic heroine, I assume? He studied her with interest, and his face transformed completely. His gray eyes melted, lips relaxed, and the angry furrow between his brows disappeared. I suppose so, Nuria smiled. And what about you? He rolled his eyes playfully, as if he was lost in thought. I think it depends on the circumstances. At the moment, romance is as far away from me as life itself. Jamie suddenly grew serious. Well, then I suppose it's time for me to remind you that we have procedures scheduled for today. Nuria wanted to distract him from his melancholic thoughts. A gust of wind made her shiver. The weather was changing. She picked up the blanket from the bench and draped it over Jamie's shoulders, accidentally brushing against his cheek. As soon as it happened, it felt like an electric shock ran through Nuria's body. He seemed to sense it too and, for the first time during their short acquaintance, looked away. Let's go, it's getting chilly. Nuria managed to regain her composure while struggling with her emotions. Otherwise, I'll have to treat you from a cold as well. The young man merely snorted but still allowed her to lead him inside. Opening the door to his room, Nuria pushed the wheelchair inside. I'll help you transfer to the bed now, and then we can begin. First, I want to examine your legs. She noticed that he clutched the armrests of the wheelchair, causing his knuckles to turn white. Misinterpreting his unease, she tried to speak as indifferently as possible. No need to be shy, Jamie. I'm a healthcare professional. Thank you so much, he sarcastically replied. Now I feel much better. She even caught him hiding a smile. As he finally landed on the bed, Jamie let out a loud sigh. It was extremely unusual for him to have a young and beautiful woman in his room since his fiancé left him 2 years ago. Nuria looked at his once healthy and strong body, and her heart ached. Jamie had a sporty slimness and broad shoulders. His hands still showed the muscles he had once trained, but it was evident that he hadn't lifted weights in a long time. She looked at his legs, which were thin and flabby. Muscle atrophy had already begun, and it was not good. Nuria finally touched his legs. The tingling in her fingertips became unbearable. She trembled, not understanding what was happening. Jamie also sat still, as if he had swallowed a steak, afraid to exhale. Feeling a strange surge of energy, she began to massage his legs, wholeheartedly wishing for this person to walk again someday. Suddenly, he stopped her. "I felt something," he said. "What?" His voice snapped her out of her reverie. "What did you feel?" She froze. "Your hand's on my big toe on the left foot." Encouraged by his words, Nuria started massaging his ankle. "Yes, exactly." His eyes sparkled feverishly. "Oh my God. Keep going." As Nuria lay in her bed, she mentally replayed the events of the day. She clearly understood that something strange was happening to her and the people around her. The place, the house, the surroundings, everything seemed familiar. She saw Jamie's face again when he felt his body again. A spectrum of emotions swirled within him: joy, disbelief, and fear. The fear that it was all not real. But with some sixth sense, Nuria knew that it was true, that a miracle had indeed happened, and she was the reason for it. And again, that lingering dream. This time, she was in a bedroom, a large bed with a canopy, candles, and candelabras. There were two of them, two exhausted by passion. A man and a young woman who was already very familiar to the girl. She gazed at him as if the world around them didn't exist, as if he was the center of the universe. His eyes were warm and smiling. Oh, those gray eyes with a subtle touch. Nuria already knew them. "I love you so much," the woman said. "I will never love anyone more than you." "I love you too." The man leaned in and kissed her lips. "And so you always knew it, here." He took a large gold ring with a bright emerald, as green as spring foliage, off his pinky finger and placed it on her ring finger. "Is this a promise?" she asked, her voice reminiscent of Honorina. "Yes, it's my oath," he replied. Nuria woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in cold sweat. Her fingertips throbbed, and her heart raced like a wild animal. She sat up in bed, reached for a glass of water, and slid her feet onto the floor, finding her slippers in the dark. After gulping down the water, she, without knowing why, opened the door to the hallway. No one was there, but Nuria could swear she heard the swishing of skirts near Jamie's room. Her legs carried her in that direction, and when she reached the door, she opened it without knocking. Jamie was sitting on the bed, his forehead covered in beads of sweat. It seemed he wasn't even surprised to see Nuria in his room in the middle of the night. "Who are you?" he exclaimed, staring at her intently. The girl helplessly replied, I don't know. I just had a dream." "I had a dream too. You were there. And in my dream, you were there too." They didn't even realize how the tension between them vanished. An awkward silence hung in the air. Nuria stepped closer and perched herself on the edge of the bed. "I have this feeling," Jamie began, "that you appeared in this house not by chance." The girl didn't know how to respond. "I feel like I've been here before, a long time ago. The thing is, I was taken from the orphanage, and I know nothing about my ancestors." "Maybe. You think you could be related to me?" He smirked. "No, not that. I think I would have felt it, probably. It's just these strange dreams, they feel like they're from the past." And after a pause, seeing Jamie's attentive gaze, she added, "Do you think I'm crazy?" He shook his head. "I have strange dreams too, like a TV series." He slung himself onto the pillow and said, "You know, everyone believes that my family is cursed." "How so?" Nuria thought he was joking. "It's not hard to believe, considering that all the men in our family die as soon as they have heirs. The exception was my father, who lived until he was 53. But now I'm in a wheelchair, and the sentence line will probably end with me. What kind of curse? Nuria felt her legs starting to freeze. Despite the warm May nights, drafts freely roamed the huge house. They say that once my ancestor betrayed his love and left her for a more advantageous marriage. And this girl cursed him. I dream of a man with some woman. Today I realized that you are the spitting image of her. Nuria trembled, whether from cold or excitement. And what did you see today? Today I saw them in bed, and he gave her a ring. The room spun around her. Nuria couldn't say a word, her fingertips burned. A mysterious puzzle began to come together in her head, and she looked at Jamie. He was clearly waiting for her to say something, but instead she moved closer to him. And their eyes met, but now she saw much more in them than before. There was the history of their family, lived through 2 centuries of misfortunes, tragedies, and losses. Nuria understood that she had to kiss this boy, or she simply wouldn't survive. And it seemed that he was ready for this, because his hand suddenly rested on the back of her neck and drew her closer. Their lips touched, and in that very moment, all the memories of past years, contained in the blood that flowed in their veins, crashed down on them. Images of the lives of people connected to their birth raced through their minds, scenes of their last moments. Their feelings, fears, honor, love. 2 people stood out vividly, the ones from whom this whole story began. Nuria didn't notice how she ended up lying next to Jamie on the uncomfortable orthopedic bed. Something miraculous was happening in that moment, because she felt his masculine strength, the firmness of his embrace, and some unbreakable bond between them. It wasn't a disabled man lying next to her, but a healthy and passionate one. Maybe it was all just a dream, but it was so captivating, so sweet and incredible, that Nuria allowed herself to surrender to the will of her feelings, suddenly breaking free from a long confinement. Morning crept into the room through the tightly curtained windows with a timid ray of sunlight. Somewhere in the stable, horses neighed, the usual fuss of people could be heard, and a noisy rooster started his song right under the window of the girl's bedroom. Jamie woke up first and feverishly began to put on the clothes he had left on the floor the night before. Nuria, my love, I have to go. He leaned towards the sleepy girl, who sweetly stretched and wrapped her arms around his neck. Just a little longer. She pressed his face to her chest. Jamie took a deep breath, smelling her hair, and with effort slipped out of her embrace, skillfully jumped onto the windowsill, and disappeared into the rays of the rising sun. Nuria abruptly opened her eyes and realized that the events of the night were real. A heavy man's hand of Jamie rested on her chest, and the hair on his temple moved from his steady breathing. It was cozy lying next to him, as if she had found her home after long wanderings. But most importantly, he started to feel something. And although the lower part of his body was bound by illness, it seemed to her that it responded to her touch a few times. Carefully getting out from under his hand and dangling her legs off the bed, Nuria found her slippers on the floor and, standing up, slightly pulled back the blanket. Jamie was still fast asleep, and she began to massage his ankle. She became so focused that waves of wild, powerful energy started to emanate from her. Her fingertips became painfully sensitive, as if she had entered some kind of trance. Suddenly, the universe shrank and enveloped her, encouraging and assisting her. Oh my, am I not sleeping? I can feel your touch. Jamie's excited voice snapped her out of her stupor. She looked up, but her gaze, bypassing his face, stopped where a woman stood near the curtain. The sun rays did not reach her, as she was securely hidden in the shadows. But her eyes burned so intensely that Nuria couldn't look away. She knew this woman, had seen her many times, and felt her presence. It was this woman that the man, who appeared in the girl's dream this morning, left in bed. Suddenly, the uninvited guest raised her hands to her face, and Nuria nearly lost consciousness. They were charred up to the elbows. She even smelled the scent of burnt flesh, which made her dizzy. What's wrong with you? Jamie grabbed Nuria's hand, and the figure in the corner melted away as if it had never been there. There was not a trace of blood on the girl's face. She was paler than chalk. It's nothing, she slowly replied, and, directing her hand up her leg, pressed on the calf muscle. Yes, and here too. He immediately forgot about everything, happily looking at the girl. There were sparkles in his eyes. You know, it's like a miracle. Nuria tried to find the right words. Yes, you are a miracle yourself. Just please, don't tell anyone until we are sure. Jamie now resembled a little boy, disheveled and endearing. Nuria reached out and brushed off the unruly dark strand from his forehead. So much had changed for both of them that night. Something appeared and brought them closer. I won't tell anyone. And now I need to quietly go back to my room and freshen up. He nodded silently, pulling her closer to him. Nuria found it so natural that she didn't even think of stopping him. She just placed her hand on his chest and kissed his cheek. Don't linger, Jamie said reluctantly, releasing her from his embrace. I'll be quick, Nuria promised and slipped out the door. Half an hour later, they were sitting in the dining hall, enjoying the cottage cheese pancakes prepared by Katerina. Anna chatted incessantly, but she couldn't hide the change that had occurred between the two young people. You both look very happy today, she casually remarked, sipping her coffee. Jamie just smiled and gave Nuria a meaningful look. After breakfast, they spent a long time in the gym, then went outside and asked Katerina to make coffee. It was sunny but cool enough. The wind blew from the river, and clouds drifted sporadically. Birds, intoxicated by the aroma of herbs and flowers, chirped merrily just above the ground. Rain was imminent. Nuria and Jamie sought refuge in the covered arbor, entwined with ivy, which had already begun to shed its leaves, and they were securely hidden from prying eyes. She carefully covered his legs with a blanket and tightly zipped up her cardigan. Come here, her boyfriend called, when she was about to sit on the bench. Are you sure? The girl looked at his delicate knees with concern. Absolutely, Jamie said seriously. I'm not as weak as you think. I didn't say that, Nuria said with a smile, carefully sitting on his lap and wrapping her arm around his neck. For about 5 seconds, they simply looked at each other as if they hadn't seen each other in a long time and couldn't get enough of each other's company. Then they kissed. It was long and intoxicating, like the wildflowers of May. Everything happened so quickly that they hadn't even had time to get used to each other. Do you understand that we need to talk? Nuria asked, breaking away from his lips. I agree, Jamie smiled and hugged her tighter around the waist. It's quite obvious that we are connected by some sort of story, a tragic one. And if you know who you are and who your ancestors are, unfortunately, I don't. In the place where I was before I was adopted, I was given almost no information, except that my parents died and my real last name is not Torres, but Marlborough, Nuria sighed. Well, actually, I have some thoughts. Jamie took her hand and brought it to his lips. Once upon a time, we had neighbors, the Lozanos, I think. That was about 200 years ago. But then the estate, along with all the buildings, burned down almost completely. I don't know how it happened. According to my father, who heard it from my grandfather, the entire Lozano family perished in the fire along with their servants. They say it was arson, but no evidence was found. We could check the archives at the local museum. Unexpectedly, a picture of a woman with charred hands appeared before Nuria's eyes. Jamie, she looked into his eyes. This morning I had a dream, and then there was a woman from our visions in your bedroom. In my bedroom? What do you mean? His disbelief in his voice hurt her. You don't believe me? I do, I just can't understand. The woman was standing by the curtain. It was her ghost. I don't know. She looked away and asked, have you ever had the feeling that someone or something is present next to you? His gaze confirmed her suspicions. Go on, I'm listening. Well, this morning in your room by the curtain, I saw a woman with charred hands. I could even smell the smoke. Perhaps that's the key to solving this mystery, but I don't know who she is. Did she belong to the Lozano family, or was she simply connected to them? Maybe she perished or got hurt there, as only her hands were burned. Jamie thought for a moment, then said, in those times, all events, births and deaths, as you probably know, were recorded in a church book. It was sort of like a registry office. So, these books could still be preserved there. We could try to find some clues. Are you saying that the church is still there? Nuria's heart pounded loudly. Well, you can hardly say that. It's abandoned. I used to play there as a child. And how will we find these books? Most likely, everything has decayed a long time ago. And what will they tell us? I think it's worth a try. Can you drive a car? Nuria answered affirmatively. Leoncio insisted on it once, and she was grateful to him now. An hour later, they loaded the wheelchair into the car. With the help of a groom, they settled Jamie in the passenger seat and drove down a dirt road towards the area where the forest gradually turned into a grove. When asked where they were going, Jamie responded that he wanted to show the girls the surrounding places. As they drove, he told her everything he knew about the family's history. Once, this church was wealthy, despite the fact that the entire parish consisted of the inhabitants of only 2 estates. However, during the revolutionary times, all property was looted and destroyed, all relics were burned. They say that something may have still remained hidden, but it's mostly just local rumors. What about the books? Where could they be? Nuria was skillfully going through the bumpy terrain. I think they might be behind the analogs or in the wall niches that used to be built in each small church. How do you know all this? The girl looked at Jamie in surprise. I studied history at university. Actually, I'm an archaeologist and have been on excavations more than once. Wow! Nuria could only utter. Meanwhile, the grove ended, and they emerged onto a plain dotted with ravines. In the center, there were ruins. Nuria felt a strange sensation, as if she had been here before. There was a figure near the ruins. From afar, it was unclear who it was, but she seemed familiar to the girl. Her palms were sweaty. She drove another 30 meters and turned off the engine where the road ended and a narrow path began. The figure disappeared. The surroundings were overgrown with weeds. Umbrellas of hogweed stood out in places. Wild bushes extended their branches, ready to protect this place from unwelcome guests. Nuria and Jamie glanced at each other. It was clear that the wheelchair had no place here. What was I thinking? He angrily slapped his knee. I should have guessed. It's fine, I'll go myself. Nuria unbuckled her seatbelt. Oh no, you can't. Jamie grabbed her hand. I won't let you go there alone. What could happen to me? The girl tried to laugh, but it came out nervous. I'll be quick. That woman you see, she scares me. I'm afraid she might harm you. Nuria's eyes sparkled. She won't harm me, the girl said confidently. She wants to tell me something. She opened the pickup truck door, but Jamie grabbed her hand. Wait. You need to know that I won't be able to handle it if something happens to you. Be careful. And I'm warning you, if you don't come back in half an hour, I'll crawl after you myself if the stroller doesn't pass. Instead of an answer, she pressed her lips to his, then jumped out of the car. Watching her figure recede along the path, Jamie sighed with longing and mentally crossed himself. Nuria cautiously made her way through the dry brushwood along the overgrown path to the hunched remains of the church. She could feel the presence of the woman from her dream on the back of her neck, but she wasn't scared. This place somehow calmed her. Approaching the door, she struggled to open it and immediately found herself in a hollow room with empty eye sockets of elongated windows and decaying floorboards, almost collapsing to the ground. The desolation was so strong that Nuria was lost. Where should she look? The girl cautiously moved forward to the spot where the altar was usually located. It was empty now. She looked around, putting her hands on her hips. A bird fluttered out from under the leaky roof with a noise, causing cobwebs and dirt to fall on Nuria. She frantically shook off her hair, panicking about insects. Something fell right into the neckline of her shirt, and the girl tried to reach for it, but accidentally touched the chain with a pendant, causing it to come undone and the pendant slid down. Nuria was genuinely scared that the pendant would slip under the floorboards, and, leaning down, she began to search through the dry leaves and debris that were scattered all around. The pendant lay right there, on the iron lid of a hatch, securely hidden from sight under old boards. The hair on the back of the girl's neck twitched as she realized what was in front of her. There was a hiding place. Everything that was happening seemed unreal to her. "Open it!" A voice sounded right above her ear, causing Nuria to almost fall. She looked around spasmodically, but there was no one behind her. At some point, she regretted coming here and desperately wanted to leave this place. But overcoming her fear, she pulled the hatch lid. It hadn't budged. The girl pulled again, exerting all the strength she could muster. Finally, the lid gave way, revealing a small niche in the floor, covered with a fabric whose color and composition were now impossible to discern. On it lay a stack of yellowed books, a vessel with some liquid, a huge silver cross, and a decayed stitcheron. Nuria looked at it all, hesitant to touch anything. An inexplicable disgust suddenly overwhelmed her, and a hand fell on her shoulder. "Take it." The girl closed her eyes. "Who are you, and what do you want from me?" "I want to leave," she groaned. "What should I do?" "Take it." Nuria reached out towards the niche when she heard another voice. "Nuria." The hand gripping her shoulder disappeared. "Nuria." It was Jamie. Apparently, he started to worry about her absence. Carefully, so as not to damage anything, the girl took out the books and hugged them to her chest, hurrying to leave this strange place. She found Jamie, desperately trying to push the wheelchair out of the car. The door was open, and he was somehow planning to get down to the ground. "What are you doing?" Nuria realized that her question was out of place, but her thoughts were in such disarray that she couldn't come up with anything better. "Nuria." Jamie saw her. "Where have you been for so long?" "What do you mean?" He looked at her intently. "You've been gone for over an hour." Nuria was in shock. She felt like she hadn't spent more than 10 minutes in those ruins. I'm sorry, I just didn't realize how time flew by." At that moment, Jamie finally noticed that she had returned not empty-handed. "No way. How did you find them?" The boy reached out his hands, and Nuria relievedly handed them over. "You were right," she replied, sitting behind the wheel. "They were hidden under the floorboards." "But how did you discover the hiding place?" Jamie carefully peeled off the stuck cover from the first page. Completely by accident, Nuria tried to make it sound as carefree as possible. "A little bird told me." She forced a smile. She didn't mention who she had been talking to in the church. He had had enough shocks for now. Starting the engine, she looked at Jamie. He sat, focused, carefully studying the records. Dark hair fell onto the collar of his shirt, his face blushed, and his eyelashes trembled as he frequently narrowed his eyes, trying to decipher the faded ink. Suddenly, the girl realized that she had completely and irreversibly fallen in love with this boy just like that, even she knew him a couple of days. Although, no, it was love at first sight. From that very first encounter in the library of the mansion, a little over 2 weeks ago. He felt her gaze and looked up from his reading. Their eyes met, and the world around them ceased to exist. That, perhaps, was the true magic for which the planet spins. Two souls met, and everything else ceased to matter. "I was afraid that something happened to you. How could I live then? But everything is fine, right?" Nuria moved closer to Jamie and ran her hand over his cheek, where a barely noticeable stubble was appearing. "I'm with you, I'm here. I always felt like there was someone else there in the church, and I wouldn't be able to protect you. It's unbearable. Let's go home." The girl left a gentle kiss on his lips and put the car into reverse gear. Managing to maneuver the bulky car on the narrow road, she pressed the accelerator pedal, and they headed towards the estate. Anna ran towards them in excitement. "Where have you been?" "I was worrying." "Grandma, everything is fine. We are alive and well. Plus, we're just so hungry." Jamie tried to joke. "Don't do that anymore." She looked at her grandson's companion reproachfully. "It could be dangerous." Nuria smiled apologetically. I'm sorry, Honorina, it won't happen again. Your grandson is a very knowledgeable and interesting storyteller. Time flew by unnoticed. The old woman softened. Yes, my Jamie knows the local history very well. Has he already told you about the Lozano estate? Oh, he did. Nuria nodded. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed Jamie sitting in his wheelchair with the help of the stable hand Giorgio, hastily hiding their find under the seat. Once in her room, Nuria picked up her mobile phone, unplugging it from the charger. There were 5 missed calls from her mom. Suddenly, she felt very ashamed and dialed the number. Hello, Nuria? Why aren't you answering? I was about to go to your mysterious castle with the police. Mama, everything is fine, the girl tried to calm her down. There's no need for it. You haven't called since you arrived there, and now you're not picking up the phone. My phone was just charging in the room while we were out. We? You and your ward? Well, yes. I'm waiting for details, and I'm begging you, don't do anything foolish. Nuria chatted with her mother for another 40 minutes, of course, not mentioning her relationship with Jamie, the church, and the mysterious woman who was haunting her thoughts. After dinner, Nuria massaged Jamie's legs again, and again his body responded to her touch, this time in the area of his knee. He was overjoyed, like a child. They could hardly wait for all the mansion's inhabitants to go to sleep, after which Jamie found himself in Nuria's room. The girl helped him onto her bed and made him comfortable. She herself took the church manuscripts in her hands and sat down next to him. Jamie started reading. The chronicle of 2 noble families and their servants was recorded started from 1670. Soon, they became entangled in names, surnames, and family connections. What are we looking for? Nuria sighed, rubbing her swollen legs. A needle in a haystack? Be patient, Nuria. It all takes time. I'm thirsty, it's so hot today. She got off the bed. Do you need anything? Jamie looked at her with longing. You have no idea how much I need right now. I'm serious, she smiled and sat down next to him. But I believe that the day will come when we fulfill all your dreams and desires. Now I believe that too. Jamie took her hand and kissed her palm. And right now, I would like a sandwich, a simple ordinary sandwich with cheese and ham. The corridor was dark, but the girl didn't turn on the lights. It could wake up Katerina. She made her way to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and drank it all in one go. Nuria was already spreading butter on the bread, preparing to cover it with a slice of cheese and a piece of ham, when she suddenly realized that she was not alone in the room. The girl slowly turned her head towards the window. The woman was there standing near the curtain and looking at Nuria. Find me. The ghost moaned. What? She didn't understand. What do I need to find? Where? The girl desperately wanted to help. 1825. Remember. 1825. Nuria repeated the combination of numbers. Is that the year of your birth? Death? The vision vanished as suddenly as it appeared. Nuria's hands were shaking, and the tips of her fingers felt like they had been dipped in sulfuric acid. Well, what is this? The girl quickly finished making the sandwich and hurried back to her room. I know what to look for. Look, 1825. What? Jamie didn't understand. Where did you get that from? Just trust me. Nuria sat down next to him while he searched through the pages for the specific date. Here, I found it, he exclaimed at last. On the 15th of May, in the year 1825 from the birth of Christ, a daughter was born in the estate of Lozano to Prince Antonio. She was baptized and named Nuria. Nuria? Could this be a coincidence? The girl wondered. Meanwhile, Jamie continued reading. On the 2nd of August, in the year 1825 from the birth of Christ, a son was born to Count Estefanio Santos. He was baptized and named Jamie. The young couple exchanged glances, understanding everything. This is where the story begins. These were their ancestors, Nuria Lozano and Jamie Santos. They loved each other. The complicated puzzle was starting to come together. Keep reading, Nuria looked at him intently. It goes on to say that in the year 1842, Nuria was married to Prince Leno, who passed away, oh my goodness, on the night after their wedding. Jamie looked at Nuria. What do you think about this? I think this woman is somehow connected to his death, Nuria replied. I'm not sure, of course, but I have this feeling that she wasn't just an ordinary woman. There is some power in her that I constantly sense. And maybe. She paused and looked at Jamie. There is such power in me too. What do you mean? I think she was a witch. All these symbols that I see in my dreams, these herbs, and in general, these dreams, they are real visions and, Nuria hesitated, unsure whether to say it. What? Jamie looked worriedly at the girl. Speak up, don't hold back. She was in the church, she was talking to me. What? Why didn't you tell me? He was genuinely angry. She could have harmed you. The guy grabbed Nuria's hand. Do you understand that? She won't harm me, she wants me to help her. And I think this woman is my ancestor. But, is she the same Nuria mentioned in the book? Jamie was staring at her intently. This girl radiated such energy that his heart skipped a beat. From the moment he first laid eyes on her, he knew she was the one. It wasn't just that his body awakened to her touch, it felt like he had known her his whole life. The moment they kissed for the first time only confirmed it. But now they had to figure out what had happened 2 centuries ago. Why was his family cursed? And Jamie was now certain that there was more to all these deaths of men in their lineage, his own dreams confirming it. Jamie, Nuria interrupted his thoughts. I need to visit the Lozano estate. Or what remains of it. He paused, thinking. It's just a wasteland now, with a few ruins. Overrun by birch trees. And so what? Nuria replied. I really need to go there. Suddenly, Jamie tensed. Wait. There's another entry here. The year 1851. Son of Count Estefanio Jamie, by the way, married Marga Lozano, daughter of Prince Antonio and his wife Rufina. So he married Nuria's sister. What does all this mean? Maybe they were just lovers, Nuria suggested, and then he married her sister, and she was betrayed. And if she possessed supernatural powers, she could have cursed her ex-lover. Well, that makes sense, Jamie agreed. Suddenly, he remembered something. By the way, there are some old documents in my grandfather's office upstairs. Merchant contracts, certificates. They're displayed in a case like museum exhibits. I saw them when I was a child. Then, I must have forgotten about them, but maybe they will shed some light on something. Nuria perked up. Perhaps, but how will you get up? I mean, upstairs? The young man gave her a sly smile. You might be surprised, but there's an elevator in the house. They ended up falling asleep together on Nuria's bed. She could feel the beating of his heart under her palm, and she felt good and calm. But soon, she had a dream. It was heavy and terrifying. No. No, please, don't do it. A tall, thin man was pulling her hand down a narrow staircase. No, no, don't do this. She struggled and cried, clinging to the moss-covered walls of the dungeon, but he dragged her, gripping her tightly above the elbow. You are a disgrace to me. Spawn of hell. The man looked at her with hatred, disheveled, scratched, crying. You are a witch, just like your offspring. I regret not strangling her as soon as she came into this world. No. Please, no. Her eyes widened in horror as they finally stopped in front of a wrought iron door. No, please. But he already unlocked it with his free hand. Something clicked. He took hold of the heavy bolt, which slid open with a chilling screech. The door swung open, revealing a dark chamber, its stone walls, floor, and ceiling. Ice cold and gaping like a grave. The man forcefully pushed her inside, and she fell. "Stay here until you die." She desperately lunged towards him, but he was already closing the door. "No. Please, don't leave me. Please. Father." "No." Nuria jolted upright in bed, causing Jamie to jump in fear. What happened? Another dream? Dawn was barely breaking in the east, and the wide window in Nuria's bedroom filled the room with a soft pink hue. "No, it wasn't a dream," the girl sobbed, struggling to catch her breath. The horror of the unfortunate Nuria Lozano, who was undoubtedly the woman from her dreams, had transferred to her. It was a nightmare, a terrible one. "Well, it's over now." Jamie embraced the girl, clumsily propping himself up on the pillow. "Tell me, what did you see?" And she, choking on her tears, told him about what she had witnessed. She died there, in that dungeon, of hunger, cold, and fear. "Do you understand?" Jamie gazed into emptiness. How could my father do such a thing to his daughter? For what reason? I don't know. I don't know. But it's so terrifying, inhumane. That's why she can't find peace. But how is my family connected to this? Jamie pondered. Did she kill someone who was my ancestor? That's what we have to find out, Nuria said, calming down a bit in his embrace. After their morning exercises and necessary rituals, Nuria and Jamie strolled in the garden for a long time. Katerina set up breakfast in the gazebo, where they eagerly ate thin pancakes with jam and drank strong coffee, enjoying the tranquility of the late May morning. Honorina went into town for some urgent matters, which was convenient because she strongly opposed Jamie going up to the second floor. Squeezing into a small elevator hidden from view between the pantry and the kitchen, Nuria and Jamie found themselves on the second floor, where the girl had never been before. Passing several doors, they arrived at a wide wooden door. In Count Santos' office, it was dim and quiet. The only sound was the hum of the wheelchair mechanism and the pounding of their hearts. The display case was indeed there. In addition to the documents laid out on special pads, there were several promissory notes, a mouthpiece with traces of tobacco, an antique lighter, and a silver powder flask. Obviously, the Santos were quite the smokers. The key must be somewhere here. Jamie rummaged through the secretary's drawer and pulled out a small key on a chain. Voila! I feel like Nancy Drew. Nuria chuckled. She was my favorite heroine in childhood. The girl was terribly nervous, her fingertips burning again. She suddenly smelled a strange odor of dampness and rot. Jamie took out the documents from the display case. They were old receipts dated 1870, a couple of letters, and staff documents. One of them caught Nuria's attention. It was dated to 1851. The Santos purchased a maid Aurora with an infant daughter. It was strange because last night, when they were studying the church records, Jamie found a note that Aurora the maid had a daughter who died 3 days after birth. So what child was with her when she was sold to the Santos? They couldn't find any more valuable information. In the corridor where they emerged, it suddenly became cold. Jamie sneezed, and a bewildered Nuria, who couldn't understand anything, pressed the elevator button. But for some reason, the doors didn't open. Why is this happening to us? She tried again and again, but to no avail. There's a ramp on the stairs, Jamie reassured her and turned the wheelchair around. Okay, just wait for me, don't go down by yourself. She shouted after him. What the hell? She heard his frightened cry, and in the next moment, she saw him running at full speed towards the stairs. Nuria rushed after him but didn't make it in time. The wheelchair, along with Jamie, crashed down the stairs with a loud crash. No! In an instant, she found herself at the bottom next to him. Jamie was lying face down, showing no signs of life. Nuria leaned over him, but catching a glimpse of movement out of the corner of her eye, she looked up. A crinoline skirt disappeared around the corner of the hallway, raising little dust particles on the floor. How could this happen? Honorina sobbed in the hospital corridor. Where were you, Nuria? I was right there, But the wheelchair must have been faulty. The girl half-heartedly listened to the woman, her attention fixed on the young man lying in the room behind the huge glass on a hospital bed with numerous tubes and sensors. She had to go in there, she had to. Why did you go to the second floor? It was extremely foolish. Why? Jamie wanted to show me his grandfather's office. How am I supposed to live now? Anna moaned. If Jamie doesn't recover, I won't be able to live. What is the reason for it? Finally, a nurse gave her some valerian to drink, and the poor old woman fell asleep right on the narrow couch in the medication-scented hospital corridor, where Jamie had been brought immediately after the accident. Waiting for everyone to disperse, Nuria quietly snuck into the room. Pain and regret flooded her when she saw the pale, beautiful face, the lifeless hands lying along his body, bruises on his shoulders. Jamie's eyes were tightly shut. He hadn't regained consciousness yet. Nuria cautiously sat down on a chair by the bed and took his hand in hers. The hand was warm and very familiar. She brought it to her lips and began to cry. "Wake up, please, wake up. Don't leave me, I'm begging you. I need you so much." Unexpectedly, she straightened up, wiped away her tears, and closed her eyes. She focused, imagining a wreath made of 9 herbs, woven together. The tangle of powerful energy she felt within herself slowly began to unravel. Her legs and arms became heavy and sensitive. Heat spread throughout her body, down to her fingertips and hair. She took Jamie's hand again and started whispering words that came to her mind. It was an unfamiliar ancient language, known to only a few living on Earth. Nuria felt the energy transferring to him, nourishing him. She generously gave it to him because he needed it more. The girl woke up from someone stroking her hair. She was sitting on the floor next to the hospital bed, with her head resting on it. Nuria raised her eyes and almost died of happiness. Familiar gray eyes were looking at her, and the hand that had been lifeless and helpless not long ago was running through her light locks. Without saying a word, the girl stood up and rushed towards Jamie. She pressed her cheek against his, found his lips with hers, and ran her fingers through his dark hair. "You woke up, thank God. I was so scared." He kissed her passionately, desperately, as if their lives depended on it. The duty nurse caught them in the act. "For heaven's sake! What are you doing here, young lady? Leave the room immediately." Then, realizing that the patient was getting better, she ran off to find a doctor. At that moment, Anna burst into the room and rushed to her grandson, followed shortly after by the doctor. Nuria walked out into the corridor, her thoughts returning to the mansion. She knew that what had happened to Jamie was not an accident and was determined to put an end to it. When the chaos around Jamie subsided, she went back in to see him. Anna was dozing in a chair by the window, softly snoring. When Jamie saw Nuria, he reached out his hands, and she, trying not to wake the old woman, gently leaned towards him. "I have a surprise for you," he smiled and moved the edge of the blanket, revealing his ankles. Nuria looked on in awe as he was wiggling his fingers, and tears of happiness streamed down her cheeks. She took his face in her hands and kissed him. "I knew this would happen, I believed. It feels like a whole lifetime has passed in these few days." "I think it's all thanks to you," he said seriously. "You are my guardian angel." She laughed softly. "Jamie, I have to go, but I will be back very soon." "Where are you going?" Jamie worried. "To visit my mom," Nuria lied. "Since I'm in town." His face relaxed. "Then say her hi from me." "Of course." She stopped at the door and looked at him again, her heart squeezed at the sight of him. She realized that life would never be the same. Everything had changed, and she had changed too. Blowing Jamie an air kiss, she slipped out the door. She arrived at the mansion around 11 in the evening. Alejandro, the driver, dropped her off near the porch and headed to the garage. Only the kitchen window was lit in the house, and Nuria went straight there. She hadn't eaten anything since morning. Katerina was sitting at the table, drinking coffee and watching TV. When she saw Nuria, she startled. Well, how is the boy doing? Anna called and said he woke up. The worst is already behind us, the girl said, tiredly sitting down on a chair. He's fine. Do you have something to eat? Katerina slapped her thigh. Of course, poor girl, you must be hungry. I'll get it right now. And hurry to the fridge. Very soon, there was a fragrant minced cutlet with mashed potatoes, Olivier salad, and a slice of apple pie on the table. Nuria smiled gratefully. I can't eat all of this, she said. Will you join me? I'm on a diet. Katerina reported, pouring a mixture of aromatic herbs with boiling water. Eat as much as you want. The girl nodded and began cutting the chop with a knife. The next morning, she planned to visit the ruins of the Lozano estate, believing that she would find some clues there. And again, she had a dream. Everything was in flames. A woman was frantic and couldn't find a way out. She heard the screams of people dying in this hellish fire, felt their fear. Smoke filled her lungs, sparks danced in her hair, and she laughed. Nuria Lozano stood aside, the flames not touching her. She showed Nuria her hands, they were in the ground. The girl jumped up on the bed. The pendant hanging around her neck was as hot as a burning coal, it burned her skin. Shivering, Nuria broke the chain and threw the ominous ornament on the floor. It's her, flashed through her mind. She started the fire. She destroyed the mansion. But how? She was in a dungeon. Unable to wait any longer, Nuria jumped out of bed and, despite the early hour, headed to the bathroom. After washing her face with cold water, brushing her teeth and fixing her hair, she put on jeans, a t-shirt, soft moccasins, and grabbed a windbreaker before stepping out onto the porch. The sun was slowly rising, like a huge plate, painting the sky a soft pink color. It was chilly, so Nuria put on her jacket. Giorgio was smoking on a bench before going to clean the stables. Good morning, Nuria greeted him. Good morning, miss, the elderly but still robust man chuckled. Can't sleep? I love early morning walks, Nuria lied and headed towards the gate. She walked with confidence, as if she knew the way. Passing through the familiar grove, she walked along a winding path through fields overgrown with various grasses and weeds. Strange that such a huge land is abandoned, she pondered. With some sixth sense, she understood that she was on Lozano land. It was her home. After another 300 meters, she saw the ruins of the old house. There were quite a few of them, lost among the dense birch trees and barely noticeable to inattentive eyes. A strange excitement overwhelmed Nuria. She swallowed a lump in her throat and headed deeper into the grove, which had become a memorial to the history of her ancestors. Nuria immediately spotted the woman standing near a small hill. Her hair was loose, her dress covered in dust and cobwebs. She beckoned the girl. What do you want? Nuria sobbed, suddenly trembling. Come here, she whispered, although her lips didn't move. They crossed what was once the courtyard and descended the hill towards the river. There, she stopped, looked down, and disappeared. Nuria approached the spot and discovered something solid beneath a layer of moss and dirt. It was a hatch. Overcoming a sudden wave of nausea, she crouched down. She already knew what this hatch was. She knew who or what she would find deep underground. Would she have the strength and courage to go all the way? Could she overcome the evil that she increasingly felt in this place? Suddenly, Jamie's pale face appeared before her. Of course, she could do it. She had to. They needed answers. Finding a piece of iron among the ruins, Nuria scraped away the dirt and moss from the hatch cover. After spending a good half hour on it, she grabbed the heavy ring with both hands and pulled. The cover didn't budge. It was too big and heavy. Exhausted, Nuria dropped to all fours, resting her palms on the ground. At that moment, she felt a powerful surge of energy filling her entire being, every cell of her body pulsating with an unprecedented strength. This time, the hatch opened immediately. She saw the dark, moldy, and damp spiral staircase. Turning on the flashlight on her mobile phone, Nuria bravely stepped down. She recognized this place, even if she had seen it twice in her dreams. Suddenly, an overwhelming fatigue, pain, and despair washed over her, saturating the earthy walls. It is a crypt, she thought. Barely stepping on the first step, reality blurred, and she started to have visions. I loved him. Oh, how I loved him. A voice sang right next to her ear, causing her skin to crawl. She saw a very young Nuria dancing at the ball with Jamie. They looked at each other tenderly and lovingly. They couldn't have been older than 16. Then, a wedding ceremony, a young Nuria standing at the altar with an elderly man with a large mole on his cheek, obviously the same Lozano mentioned in the book. Then, a bedroom. In the bed, a frightened girl, with her husband approaching her like a storm cloud, grabbing her hands. But she pushes him away so forcefully that he goes flying across the room and hits his head on a chair. Blood spills onto the parquet floor. And now, an adult Nuria in bed with her beloved Jamie. Then, Jamie's and Marga's wedding, with Nuria standing by the door, whispering a curse. She fails to notice her father looking at her with fear in his eyes. Then, Nuria, with a large round belly, was screaming in agony on the bed as her child was about to be born. It was a girl, and a woman in a large white smock took the baby away. Nuria was begging them to leave her, but her father locked her in the room. Then came the familiar vision, her father sealing his unfortunate daughter in a dark hole underground. She was struggling there, crying, running her hands along the stone floors and walls. Suddenly, a stone broke off the wall, and dirt fell into her hands. Then there was the laughter of wicked, unnatural laughter. She was whispering incantations. Then there was a fire, everything was engulfed in flames. Everyone in the estate perished in it. This was her revenge, a terrible revenge for a terrible cruelty. Nuria couldn't breathe. Now she knew everything, she understood everything, about the herbs, the land, the book that mysteriously ended up in her possession. About the Santos family curse. Jamie was in danger, still in danger. She had to save him, because she was Nuria's heir, a witch too. She knew it just as surely as she knew her own name. Now she knew her origin, her roots. It made her head spin. When Nuria snapped back to reality, there was a door in front of her, surrounded by pitch darkness. Of course, she didn't have a key. She reached out and rubbed the familiar image on the cast iron surface. Oh God! There was an iron door. How her father feared that his daughter would escape. Above the door, the voice whispered. Nuria was trying to find something around the mosaic frame, and she did find something cold and long. She brought her phone with a flashlight closer to the object and realized it was a key. I wonder who touched it last. Was it the Duke Lozano? Inserting the key into the hole on the left, the girl turned it with effort. A chilling, ominous cold washed over her as the huge door creaked open. For a moment, the girl was standing there, hesitant to enter. Go, the voice said. She obeyed. It was a chamber, terrifying, dark, and icy. Stone was everywhere, the smell of fear and death hung in the air. Nuria spotted it immediately, a small skeleton sitting by the far wall. Tears suddenly sprang from her eyes, overwhelming her with pity for this girl who had been unable to find peace for 2 centuries. She had met a terrible death here, in pitch darkness and loneliness. And all she had wanted was happiness. Instead, she had been betrayed by her closest and most loved ones. I want to leave, whispered the figure leaning over the skeleton. She looked at Nuria, sadness swimming in her eyes. Bury me. Nuria suddenly remembered. Why did you try to kill Jamie? The curse had already taken its toll on him. The figure shook her head. I saved him. If it weren't for me, he would have died. So, you didn't wish him harm? Again, she shook her head. Bury me, she repeated. Nuria approached the remains, and something sparkled in the flashlight's beam. There, on the stone floor of the tomb, among the white phalanges once belonging to fingers, lay a ring with an emerald. The same gift from the Santos family. Take it, it's yours. Trembling, Nuria picked up the heavy ornament with her shaking hands. It radiated energy, and she felt it with every fiber of her being, though she had grown accustomed to the sensation. Taking off her windbreaker, she carefully placed every bone inside it, every single one. Her face was wet with tears. No one in this world deserved such a death. Once she managed to get out of the dungeon, Nuria closed her eyes. The bright daylight struck her eyes, and the sun hung high in the sky. How long had she spent in the tomb? 2 hours? 3? She looked around, searching for a suitable place. To him. Take me to him, the voice said. The figure was standing nearby. It was transparent, immaterial. But for the first time, her expression was peaceful. Nuria knew where the Santes ancestors were buried. It was an old graveyard behind the church, where she had been once before. Carefully holding her burden to her chest, the girl walked towards the church. She walked and walked, feeling the presence of the ghost behind her. Finally, the ruins of the church came into view, with the overgrown cemetery behind it. There were no less than 100 tombstones, and Nuria started walking between them. Unexpectedly, near a leaning moss-covered stone slab by a fallen fence, she saw a familiar figure. It was Jamie Santes' grave. The figure leaned against the slab and closed her eyes. Nuria couldn't hold back her tears again. After finding a makeshift shovel in the church and taking a cross from hiding, the girl returned to the grave. She dug into the compacted soil for a long time, scratching her hands and drawing blood with small stones before she could dig a small pit. Into it, she placed the remains of Nuria along with her windbreaker. After making a quick sign of the cross, she covered everything with soil and placed the cross on top. The figure was standing there, watching. "Thank you," Nuria heard. They stood and looked at each other. Two women, the past and the present. Nuria looked down at the pendant hanging around Nuria's neck. "It means nothing to you." "Leave it here," the figure said. The girl obeyed. She carefully took off the ornament and, placing it on the grave, covered it with soil. Looking up in search of Nuria, she suddenly realized that she was gone. Exhausted and weary, Nuria returned to the mansion. It was already getting dark. Katerina greeted her in the hallway with an angry look. "Where have you been?" "We were about to call the police." "I was out for a walk," Nuria answered, ignoring her. "All day?" The girl nodded affirmatively, wanting to talk the least right now. "Dear, are you home?" Amarana came out of the library towards her, glowing with excitement. "Good evening," Nuria greeted with a forced smile. "We have wonderful news, Nuria. Absolutely fantastic. You were right. So right. Jamie, he started to feel his legs. Today he moved his fingers." "I'm incredibly happy," the girl sincerely replied. "How is he now?" "Wonderful. He still has rehabilitation ahead, but he'll be home very soon. But don't worry, your job will still be waiting for you. It will be difficult for him for a while. Are you hungry, I suppose?" "No, I'm not hungry, thank you," Nuria barely murmured and, reaching her room, fell into a deep sleep. 3 months later, Jamie began to move with the help of crutches. Nuria couldn't forget the moment when she showed him the ring she found in the tomb when she visited him at the hospital. She had to tell him the whole story from beginning to end. "Nuria, how could you go there alone?" "I had to, for you, for everyone." Jamie squeezed her hands in his and looked into her eyes. He was looking at her with such a tenderness, such a warmth, that Nuria struggled to swallow the lump in her throat. "Nuria, I love you. Marry me." Those words transported Nuria back to the distant 19th century. And now, she and Jamie were slow dancing to live music played by the surf orchestra. Their reflections flickered in the mirrors of the ballroom in the Lozano mansion. She felt such tranquility and peace in her soul in that moment. 2 years passed. A nightlight glowed in the small nursery. The girl, tired from the events of the day, slept soundly in her crib. She was Nuria and Jamie's daughter. Today she was named as Dora, and a golden cross sparkled on her little neck. She peacefully dozed, her hair spread out on the pillow. The electronic nanny monitor silently blinked a green button on the display, and the transparent silhouette of a woman was barely noticeable among the folds of the curtain swaying in the light July breeze. "You will be happy, little one," whispered the voice softly. "You will definitely be happy. The family curse has been lifted. Forever."